So we've got a great lineup here. I mean, these are like the top as far as the planners go, as far as our terrain, and that's really what we're talking about today. Not just the historical terrain, but the things that they go through now to set up things that we have on the mountains, both past and present. We've got, starting out there at the far end, we've got Rich Berkeley. He's the Vice President of Mountain Operations, and he's got a great tie-in with the Historical Society, so he's kind of been my go-to guy with setting up this panel, and I'm greatly appreciative for that. We've got Kevin Haggerty here, and he's the area manager for Highlands, so he'll be talking a lot about that area. And then we've got Victor Gurdon. He's the mountain planner, sort of the, yes, you can do that there, no, you can't do that there guy. And then David Corbin here. And he's the Vice President of Planning and Development. They've got a great outline here that they gave me, kind of the subject matters that we were going over in our own conversations. Rich has kind of laid out a great plan for us, so I'm just turn it over to him and let him start talking, and then I'll be back when it's time for the question and answer session here in a little bit.
Travis, thank you. And the first thing I want to say, looking at the heavy hitters in this audience, many of you have more experience running mountains and have worked for us for more years than all of us combined. So if we say anything wrong, please jump in and correct it right away. I broke it down conceptually with snowmaking, lift technology, snow safety advances, ski product advances, and then I would like to start it off with a little bit of a real brief history of the four areas. And so we're going to have Victor Gurdon cover 3 of the mountains, and we'll have Hags cover Highlands as well. So Victor, I'll start with you, and if you can give us a quick synopsis of the history of the mountains.
Well, I'm going to take your lead, Rich, and say that with all the people in the room, my first question to anybody here is, how many people in the room actually rode Lift 1? Say, I give up.
I rest my case. Okay, here you are. There's a microphone.
So I'm going to keep it simple. Sometime in the 40s, Aspen Skiing Company started, Aspen Skiing Corporation started, and with Lift 1, 2, and 3, going from the bottom of Durant Street up to the top. In the 50s, Highlands and Buttermilk opened, and I got here in '87, so I'm a newbie by a long shot. And but the things that I heard and remembered from doing all the planning and development stuff that we did in the process of those times in the 50s and 60s, Buttermilk and Highlands actually had almost 2 to 2.5 times as many skier visits per season than they do now. There were 350,000 skier visits at Buttermilk. There was a party every Friday night. Andy, tell me about that party every Friday night. with Jordas leading the dancing at Buttermilk, and and you can imagine, the lift systems and the infrastructure there were not near what they were now. So there were long lift lines, and that was just part of the day. You waited in long lift lines, you rode long chairlifts, and how long was the ride on Lift 1? 45 minutes?
To the top.
Yeah. But
one and 2.
Yeah.
Putting them together.
Yeah, but the lift 1 was probably, John, 45 minutes? No? So, in any case, the history about those places just blows me away, and the fact that it was such a popular place in the 60s and 70s. And then when Snowmass came online, and everybody, talking to all the ski instructors who were part of that routine, and Kurt Chase being the first director, or Stein actually being the first director, and people having to go out to Snowmass, and the rumor that everybody had when you got assigned to go from Aspen Mountain to Snowmass, it was like being sent to Siberia. There was nobody that was going to go to work at Snowmass, because it was essentially another planet, and eventually Snowmass became what it is now, and literally when we do our planning stuff and go through the skier visit numbers, or the number of employees, or the revenue generation, the size of the skier, everything is at least twice everything is at least the same as the other 3 combined. From revenue to ski instructors to everything else. So Snowmass is a huge economic engine, but it also is a huge resource for providing skiers what they want to have. It's that incredible diversity of groomed terrain and intermediate terrain. So,
Victor, thank you. So 1936, roughly, skiing starts on Aspen Mountain. 46, Aspen Skiing Company is incorporated. 1958, Highlands and Buttermilk enter the mix, and 1967, Snowmass. So that's your timeline there. All of them started with dramatically less terrain than they currently have right now. And Hags will go back to 1958 and cover Highlands.
Yeah, if I can, didn't go back that far, but like I said, Andy could help me with some of this too. But one of the things that started out was with Whipple Van S. Jones owning that area. And when I was working with Don Robinson quite a bit, he used to tell me a bunch of these stories about he went out and got all the Army surplus trucks and trailers, and they started putting in the exhibition lifts and the Cloud9 lifts, the Loge lift to get you to the top. And I got to see some of the pictures of these machines in action, and I was like, wow, they were pretty gnarly building those roads. So if you look at the road that goes up Highlands, it's pretty steep from the beginning, then it gets a little easier. They actually the Robinsons worked so hard up there, they actually stayed in an apartment right behind one of the lift shacks and lived there for a while because he had his two boys out there working all the time, and it was part of a big family event that WHIP had going. And everyone stuck together with WHIP, And when I started skiing there in like '86, it was a different area than the other three areas. And then in '89, when I started working there, it was run differently. I had friends I'd worked for the Ski Co. in the mid '80s, and it was a totally different way of doing things. You made no money, you got no uniform, you had, it was very, very meek, When I started working on the chairlifts, I was working with some of the Robinsons, and we would take one of the old riblet bearings out, and we would just repack it and put it back in, whether it was good or bad. Say, it'll last another week, So, that's how tough it was, in those days. But it was also made it a lot of fun. I learned a lot working in there, and as we were talking about, the transformation from what it was 25, 30 years ago to what it is now is huge. We took out 4 lifts and we put in 2, and I was part of that process, and it was a big learning process to be able to be cutting towers down in the middle of Lower Stein going, now what are we going to do with them, So we were trying to find skidder roads and pull these things out because we weren't going to be putting a helicopter in a lot of these places, at least not until after we started flying the towers in. So really a transformation to when the Ski Co. bought the Aspen Highlands has really brought it up to where it is these days. They were willing to put money in the infrastructure. They're willing to expand terrain. One of the, at the day that they announced they were buying the Aspen Highlands in a partnership with Gerald Hines, they said that they're going to go back into looking into getting to Highlands Bowl. So that year, we started a Highland Bowl study team. And that study team took 3 of the patrollers out of our service. We hired 3 new patrollers, and every day they would go out there and look at the terrain and study the wind, the terrain, the snow, everything that it took to be able to eventually start getting that open. They would take 1 person with them each day, so they had 4 people on site, and really learning about what the weather was up like there and how we'd be able to control the area. We had been already ski packing all of the steeplechase area, which had opened up in the mid-'70s, and in those days, they didn't really know about ski packing. They just would ski it, and forecast it and get in there. Well, there's been some slides in there. Until we started ski packing the terrain, we started learning more about, well, this does help. That's what led into the Highland Bowl terrain and being able to expand it. We thought, well, we can ski pack it. And then we started learning, actually, the boot packing is the way to go. It gets a better purchase into the bottom of the ground. So we've kind of been able to work within with the company and the tools to be able to get people in there and start the ski packing program. We started working up there, opening runs in '97 in Highland Bowl. And it wasn't until about 2005 we had the whole bowl open. So each year we'd open another little segment, another little piece. Each year we'd learn more. We actually one year brought a snowcat, a winch cat in there, and we brought it up from the bottom. And it was pretty tough because you had to get the winch cable up to a tree somewhere. So I was the guy with the harness on my back, and they hooked the winch cable on my back, and I'd skin up the trees through the G zones, hook up to a tree, and then the guy in the cat would just go, "Rrr," you know. And so we got the cat up there, and the idea was to do mechanical compaction by using a big roller with big tractor tires. We've seen it done in other areas like in Telluride. So we got the roller up there, and we started practicing with it and got it back up to the top, and then it snowed so much that time, the roller got caught in an avalanche and went down to the bottom and spent the rest of the winter there. Well, we had to get a generator up top to keep the cat warm, so we hauled that in a toboggan up the ridge. It was a big 6,500 watt generator. So we keep the cat warm. Well, all of a sudden, one of the guys went to go move the cat and start it, and the fluids had drained out of it. So he ruined the whole wheel hub on the side, the whole drive mechanism. Of course, this is a leased cat that we had gotten from Prenoth. And so next thing you know, we're hauling a motor up there, hauling a wheel, and this is all in toboggans, and we're using mechanical devices to uphaul on the steep face. Well, we eventually got that up there, got that in. Well, needless to say, by that time it was already opening time, and we drove the cat off the hill, got it back to those guys, and said, we'll try that another time, we'll look at it. So we found out that this boot packing has been very, very successful, and we've actually are talking about utilizing some of the knowledge we've learned from the Highland Bowl into other existing terrain that we have out there now in what we call the Loge Bowl. The Loge Bowl is closed terrain from Highlands or from Loge Peak to No Name, and we're just starting to get into it this year, and it's pretty extreme terrain. It's got some really steep, tight chutes, and it's got some big open faces that look really neat to ski, and no one had ever ventured in there because it was like taboo. All we did was throw charges off the side, and hopefully we'll see an avalanche, you know. And now we're getting in there, starting to take a look at it, and that's just kind of our near future, looking at what we can do. Right now, with steeplechase skiing, great. Oldie Bowl, which opened in the mid-'80s, that's been a hit. You know, the goal is to look into that whole Loge Bowl area and possibly expand the Oldie Bowl area if we can. So that's kind of what we're looking at in the near future. So,
Ags, thank you. Kevin worked for Highlands before Aspen Skiing Company bought it 23 years ago, but he still refers to us as the company. Like we're separate from him. I worked with him for over 2 decades, and yet I'm still the other guys. So talk a little bit about lift technology. As we said, lifts were starting to be built in 1946 on Aspen Mountain. Albert Luchane, who, I don't know how long he's worked. John, you probably know, is it over 50 years in lift maintenance?
Yeah, 45.
45. So I'm on the tramway board, which was responsible for overseeing all the lifts in the state, and I'm down at a bar in Denver, and fortunately I talked to Albert a couple weeks earlier, and he mentioned that in the mid-40s, lift number 2 was a detachable single, which is unheard of. And they used the old mining technology to build the lift, and he had pictures of it, and I put that in the back of my mind. Well, I'm down, and we're debating when the first detachable in the state was, which also happened this weekend at the Vail World Championships. And I said, oh no, Aspen had a detachable in 1956. And I won a round of drinks, and I'm forever grateful to Albert for that. But that leads us to what Hags is referring to, and that is as we replace the fixed grips, of which we have 2 left, 2 old ones left, with the detachables, your uphill capacity dramatically increases. And that has been one of the biggest changes in skiing, and I'll let David Corbin cover a little bit of the history of detachables and how they play a role in our mountains. David.
Really? Okay. I'm probably the least qualified to actually talk about the mechanical technology of detachables, but I started in the business 27, 28 years ago in Beaver Creek, and arrived and worked with Vail Associates not long after the first quads came to Vail. So my experience and my experience with that change really occurred on the other side of the hill. And obviously a very different circumstance from Aspen's Four Mountains and how they work and how that equipment has been used here. But at the time, and having been a front range skier who skied in Aspen and in Vail before joining the industry, had visited both places and was very familiar with all of the congestion, and in particular the congestion that I experienced as a front range guest on Vail Mountain, trying to get up that hill with extremely bad lift lines. And I can vividly remember when that was alleviated as a guest at that mountain, in a far more congested situation than ours, when they started to bring those quads in, and it was really at the same period of time when George Gillette acquired that company, and the change in the skier experience was unbelievably dramatic from the point of view of a guest. And I saw it very upfront and personal on that mountain, both lifting out of base and as they went ahead and very rapidly expanded across the mountain with all of those quads. And in conversation before we started here, I did not know where the first quad was among all the four Aspen mountains, and these guys were reporting that they thought that was Burn Quad and was the first one brought here, which makes sense given the size, capacity, and skier volumes at Snowmass. And quite clearly, as we've progressed, you can see across all of the mountains, virtually everywhere, with the exception of, say, Temerity or other places where you don't need super high capacity, or you don't need the speed of the equipment, 1,000 feet a minute on the high-speed detachables. If you don't need a ride that's, say, less than 10 minutes, and you don't need high-speed technology to do it, you can rely on that slower equipment. But for us, guest experience, the time on that lift, and the desire to keep seat time at less than 9 minutes, for example, as our peak, tends to be the driver in how we select that equipment and whether it goes high speed or not. We go back and forth on whether on some of the shorter stretches we should still do high-speed equipment or fixed grips. And then you likewise get into the topic of nostalgia of, oh, I really sort of like that slow ride, which you hear not just here in a couple of select circumstances, but across the industry. I've had the privilege of working in a variety of different places within the industry here for the past 10 years, and with Vail and Beaver Creek for, I don't know, God, I was there 87 to 2000, so 13 years or so over there, and another 5 years with Booth Creek, where I worked in Tahoe and in New England, and in some of those areas as well, whether New England or Northern California in the Tahoe area. You see some really fascinating debates about whether or not newer technology, and the higher speeds in particular, should be deployed, or whether the old character, kind of the quiet, not necessarily solitude, there aren't many single chairs anywhere anymore, but whether that quiet and the experience of an old slow double should somehow be maintained as part of the experience. I think if you were probably to poll our guests, the desire for speed and sort of quick repetition and cycling in skier pods seems to be the trend, and that quick, fast uphill ride and then the ability to disperse pretty quickly across the mountain seems to compel again and again the use of a high capacity, high speed lift. And for us, capacity isn't always necessarily what's needed in terms of moving volumes of skiers so much as the choice of that shorter ride time.
No question, thank you. So a couple weeks ago, I'm in the archives here doing some research on mining claims, and I come across a map from the mid-1800s, 1880s, that had Aspen Mountain Public Tram. And you could have ridden a bucket tram to Tortolot Park from the bottom of Aspen Mountain in 1880. So it's been a while that we've had lift service access to the mountain versus lift service skiing. To give you an idea, a fixed grip double roughly carries 600 people per hour, and a detachable quad, we engineer most of ours for 1,800 people per hour. They can be engineered for as high as 2,400 people per hour, so 4 times as many. We also have now a 6-pack in Snowmass, which is 3,000 people an hour, and some of the machines over in Vail are engineered for 3,600 people an hour. So now we have put all these people up on the mountain, and we need something for them to ski on, and that is snowmaking, which is another big terrain expansion. And I'm going to let Victor Gurdon cover a little bit of the history of snowmaking and how the surface of the snow has become our most important product.
Okay, I can do that. But I do have to tell you one story about going back to the lift thing. And when we were changing out Ruthie's chairlift and so on, I mean, I had the pleasure of being able to talk with Friedel Pfeiffer a bunch before he died. And Friedel came up to me one time and he goes, "You know, Vic, the high-speed quad has taken the romance out of skiing." And I said, "Friedel, why do you say that?"
Did you ever try to get a date on a quad?
I mean, you know, he told me this when he was like 87 years old, right? And so that's why, and that was the whole idea. That's why we originally turned the Ruthie's lift into a double, which it really was a kind of a triple chair, but we only loaded 2 people on it. So you could keep the romance of skiing in there, but you had to make that date in about half the amount of time. You know? So it was a high-speed date getter, but. And yeah, there's just a bunch of other things about chairlifts that were really interesting. That the detachable technology was around for a long time because they had gondolas, and
And the platter lifts too.
That's right.
The bomber platter.
And I just imagine, I mean, gondolas were really expensive. Not only is that machine up at the top of the chair itself, at the top of the chair, an expensive thing because it attaches and detaches to the cable every time it comes around the bull wheel. But they were also expensive because the gondolas had to store all the cabins in a building. And a bunch of engineers sat around one time in the 80s or 70s and 80s and said, "Why don't we put detachable grips on chairs?" I said, "Well, you're not going to save any money. You're going to build a big building and take the chairs off and put them inside every night." And the other guy goes, "Why?" The other chairlifts don't go in a barn at night. Anyhow, but I'll get back to the task at hand. So we know a bunch of people in the room rode Lift 1 before I got here. How many people were here during the winter of 76, 77? When did we open? January 15th. It did not snow in 76, 77. I mean, we kind of bellyache a little bit about not having snow, not much new snow for the last 6 weeks, but in 76, 77 it did not snow. And I remember, I was in Jackson Hole at the time, and we came down, we closed Jackson Hole on like March 15th, and we came to Aspen for a ski vacation because it was still open. And I still remember the snow report on the radio was, top of the mountain's got 12 inches, mid-mountain's got 6 inches, and the bottom of the mountain is 2 inches of Kentucky blue. Because you literally walk from the bottom of 5 to the bottom of the hill.
Wow.
You had to walk all the way down. So that was March of 77. And you could tell all the guys from Wyoming because they were all sitting up on the roof of the little mill and we looked different. But snowmaking. So in 77, I think that's when the people who ran Buttermilk decided to hook up with a guy named Peter Alford and design a snowmaking system for Buttermilk. I don't know which trail for first, but I'm sure it was just kind of a pilot system, just enough to make snow on a trail. And that was before the quad went to the top to the bottom of Buttermilk, so you could actually make snow from midway down. So you had a 2-lift system that went to the top, and you could ski the lower part of Buttermilk if it didn't snow ever again. And then in the early 80s, the snowmaking system was put in on Aspen Mountain. Snowmass had a snowmaking system didn't have really a real snowmaking system until '97. And before that, we made snow out of the fire hydrants on Fanny Hill with kind of portable generators, and it was just really a Rube Goldberg setup. I mean, it was not anything to be proud of. But we had to get water rights and so on to get water out of Snowmass Creek to make snow on Snowmass, and we got those water rights in a giant 1994 environmental impact statement, and in '97 built that system. But the incredible thing about snowmaking technology is that everybody thinks that when it gets cold, you flip the switch and you make snow. And, you know, one snowflake is just like the next, just like the next. And, you know, what you start to realize is that when you make snow, making snow at 10 degrees is about 20 times more effective than making snow at 26 degrees. 26 degrees is below freezing, obviously, but you cannot make much snow there. And as soon as it gets cold, you know, for the same amount of energy, same amount of labor, you can produce, you know, between 5 and 10 times as much snow. So that's why we kind of crave those cold temperatures to make snow with. The other thing that has happened in the last 30, 40 years is that the snowmaking efficiency, snowmaking technologies have become incredibly diverse. I mean, you know, if you were around here listening to the man-made snow machines, the snowmakers in the 70s and 80s, they were just like, you know, 20 of the loudest jets taken off at the airport all night long, because, you know, they were really crude machines that required a lot of compressed air and a lot of water just kind of getting funneled through a little 1-inch hole in the top of a little tripod gun. And since then, the technology is gone incredibly scientific. To the point where now we have the fan guns, you know. So, I don't know, I'm gonna get caught up now. I'm gonna go back, kind of get really random. But snowmaking usually requires high pressure water and high pressure air to atomize the water to the point where the droplets become small enough to freeze on the way down onto the ground. The big drum, yellow and really colorful drum style guns have a big fan, a 50 horsepower fan inside the drum that blows the water out into the little droplets instead of the compressed air. So in other words, the big drums that you see on the hill don't need compressed air typically to make snow. And each type of gun are more efficient than another. And then there's a third type of a gun, which is the you know, you see the big long gooseneck guns kind of all over the mountain, you know, where they kind of stick up there. And they are an air water gun as well, where you need compressed air, but they use a fraction of the compressed air that the little ground guns use, the really loud ones. So, and each gun has a different optimum operating parameter. Some work better at colder temperatures, some work better at higher humidity, some work better, you know, on various pitches. Some are easier to move around than others, and so on. So we have, over the last 30 years, we have done everything we can to make snowmaking more effective and more efficient. And to give you an example, when we built the system in '97 at Snowmass, which is not that long ago, it's not even 20 years ago?
Less than 20.
Yeah. We built the main infrastructure with 3 giant 800 horsepower compressors. Now, 800 horsepower is a giant electric motor. It's the same size electric motor that runs the Big Burn chairlift. So this is a big machine to compress air to make snow. And we actually put 3 of them in there and a pad for a 4th one, because we knew when we kind of build out and start making snow in more area at Snowmass, we will need a 4th compressor to provide the infrastructure to make that snow. With the efficiencies that we've had in the last 10 years, we actually don't turn on 2 of those 3 compressors now. We make snow with 1 800 horsepower compressor and make that much more effective, that much more efficiently. And so therefore our energy bills go down, everything is just becoming that much more efficient with man-made snow. Stop me.
Well,
I mean,
one thing you might just go into is why storage matters.
Yeah, I will. One of the things that, another thing that's an interesting statistic, we measure snow in acre feet and production wise. So if you got an acre of ground, acre of ski slope, to put 1 foot of snow on that acre of ground takes about 200,000 gallons of water. So snow mass that has almost 300 acres of man-made snow and a giant terrain park pumps 85 million gallons a year. You guys pump this year 20?
11, 12 on ours,
Yeah.
plus ski club is
Right. Added to
another
it.
14,
Kinda got
so
up to 18, yeah.
25, yeah.
Yeah, buttermilk, because of X Games and everything else, it pumps probably 65,
65 million.
and Aspen about 50. So anyhow, I mean, it's a huge amount of water, and what's interesting about the sources of that water is that, you know, the water for Snowmass comes out of Snowmass Creek as raw water, purchased by or pumped by Snowmass Water and Sanitation District, and then they sell. They actually own the water rights for the snowmaking water, and then they sell us the water to make snow. Highlands actually makes snow out of raw water out of the Thompson Reservoir behind hospital where the Castle Creek and Maroon Creek water flows through there to provide the domestic water for the town. And so Highlands makes snow out of the raw water that comes out of Thomas Reservoir. And Aspen Mountain actually makes snow with potable drinking water. So you
can use it for your cocktails.
Sparkling. Yeah, we get sparkling water. Yeah, period. But you know, because there's no source of raw water in the vicinity of the bottom of Aspen Mountain. You know, the only source of water that we have is really the water tank, the domestic water tank, right at the halfway up Little Nell on the right hand side there, looking up. So anyhow, that's where they all come. But as David referred to, snowmaking storage, I mean, water storage on the mountain is key. And one of the biggest elements that happened in Snowmass was the everybody knows about Ziegler Pond and the discovery of the mammoth bones. But and the reason they were found is because Snowmass Water and Sanitation District finally struck a deal with the Ziegler family, and they actually bought that pond. And what Water and Sand always wanted to do is actually create a little bit more of a buffer. In other words, we didn't want to draw down Snowmass Creek as desperately as we would have to, especially in March when the creek flows are very low and Snowmass Village is full and you need lots of water in there. And Water and Sand was trying desperately not to draw that creek down to what the environmentalists have determined, a predetermined in-stream minimum flow that keeps the health of the riparian habitat and everything else along the river whole. And so a lot of times, you know, when it's 9 degrees and you can make snow like crazy, and that minimum in-stream flow comes into effect, we had to shut off our snow guns at Snowmass. So we could not make snow. We vowed and we kept our word that we would never draw Snowmass Creek down below its minimum in-stream flow standards. And we're pretty proud of that. So, but when Ziegler Pond was bought by Water and Sand, the intent was to create and plumb the water from Snowmass Creek into Ziegler Pond and then to the infrastructure for Snowmass Village. So right now, there is a 70 million gallon buffer at the top of the divide for all the domestic water and all the snowmaking water that goes on. So in retrospect, what we can do is we can draw as much water as we can for snowmaking. When the temperatures go right, we can pump 4,000 or 5,000 gallons a minute. But what happens at Snowmass Creek just understands that all we're doing is taking one 500 GPM pump, 500 gallon per minute pump, just kind of replenishing the Ziegler Pond Reservoir. So in other words, we're drawing that down faster than we're filling it, but in other words, we got such a big buffer, we'll never draw it down during the snowmaking season to where it can fill back up and provide. So between Water and Sand and what we've done, we pretty much have done a great thing for Snowmass Creek. But at another time, we go around and the snowmakers want us to explore and look at new technology and stuff, and I do a lot of this kind of stuff with the company and go on trips to see lift installations and snowmaking systems, And it's more or less a sales pitch by the people who are trying to sell you their stuff. But we went to a place called Seven Springs in Pennsylvania, where the rumor was they had a system, a stomach system that pumped 30,000 gallons a minute. Some pumps 3,000 gallons a minute. They pumped 30,000 gallons a minute and ran it with 4 people, and you know, and on hardly any energy. And so I had to see this place. So you know, I thought I was going to go there. I thought I was going to see the most sophisticated snowmaking system I've ever seen in my whole life. And I went there and looked at the pump house, and it looked like something I'd make in my garage. I mean, there was little horizontal pumps on the ground and kind of, you know, plumbing, water spraying all over the place. You know, but there was a lot of water, all, you know, just kind of splashing all around. But literally, at 10 o'clock at night, Doug and Kenji and I went there. At 10 o'clock at night, when they closed the ski area down, the lights stay on. Temperature was like 10 degrees that night, so we got a good show. And 4 guys started running down the hill, flipping valves. And all of a sudden, in 20 minutes, there was a snowstorm over the whole ski area. A 30,000 gallon a minute snowstorm. And what the magic to that system was, at the top of the ski area, the man who developed Seven Springs is a guy named Herman Dupre. He's kind of the Whip Jones or the Paul McCullough or the Ernie Blake of that Seven Springs resort. And he created this pond that was 50 million gallons that he called Lake Tahoe. and because of that 50 million gallons on top of the mountain, because it was so high already, you didn't have to pump it up the hill to make snow, but you have to pressurize it to make the snow gun. So the pumps didn't have to be that big. And literally, he could drain that pond as fast as he could to make snow with 4 guys and turn on hundreds of snow guns in a matter of 20 minutes. The other part about that trip, it's okay, I'm going to see this snowmaking system that has 30,000 GPM. And I say, what do they have for a water source? I mean, is it like Lake Erie, or is it you know, the Mississippi River or something like that? You know, where are they getting all this water? And he had no water source. The name of the resort was Seven Springs. And he had water rights to a bunch of little trickles and a bunch of little creeks and a bunch of little springs all around the area. And he harvested all that water and brought it down to a lake at the bottom of the hill, next to the parking lot, collected all that water all summer long, pumped it to the Lake Tahoe to the top, and then made snow with it. And then when the spring thaw, or the February thaw, or the March thaw, I mean, you know, in that part of the country, you have to start from scratch 3 or 4 times a year, as you probably know, those of you guys are from there. Well, guess where all that water would go? All that water would melt off the ski area, you go back to the lake at the bottom, you pump it back to the top, and just kind of recycle it around. And so it was brilliant. So I came back to Aspen Skiing Company and said, we need some storage. And that's when we built the Sugarless Pond, the Rayburn's Pond, the pond at the bottom of 7.
Gents Ridge.
Gents Ridge Pond, yeah. And they really work, because you can actually make more snow effectively, efficiently, when the temperatures are right. So.
You'll hear more and more about on-mountain storage as we push for high-level water storage. Number one, we don't have to pump it uphill, and that's a huge energy savings, and as our carbon footprint becomes more and more important, that will play a bigger role. We make 610 acres of snow on approximately 5,300 acres. And 3 years ago, you remember, where we had cold temps, but no natural snow, and Aspen Mountain opened on Thanksgiving Day with very good skiing from the top of Bell Mountain right down to Little Nell and down, but that was all we had. That's indicative of all the 4 mountains. We cannot really, with the exception of Snowmass and Sam's Knob, open a mountain without good natural snowfall, so we still rely on natural snowfall to a huge degree, and not too many people want to ski Spar Gulch on a lapped basis all day for 7 days for your holiday. So, natural snowfall, yes?
I'm just curious, so I'm from Australia. So the snow that we've been skiing on, I've only been here for 2 weeks, is a lot of that man-made snow then?
610 acres is man-made. Which mountain?
Oh, I've been to all 4.
All 4. You're skiing on a mix, and but generally you're skiing on natural snow.
Right.
So the vast majority of our terrain, and all the terrain that you want to ski, for instance, all of the Burn is natural. Max Park has a man-made surface. Does that help you?
Because I'm curious, because if you look at next to it, there's no snow, in the trees and so forth, but then on the groomed slopes, there's lots of snow, so is
Yes.
it a combination?
Grooming also preserves the snowpack, and so once we can pack it down, the wind doesn't affect it as much and it stays in place. But you're doing a combination of both,
Okay.
there's no question, yeah. And if you give me a specific, I can tell you exactly where you're skiing man-made versus natural.
Runs and so
So, the point being that we are going to continue as a resort to rely on natural snowfall. On snowfall, one of the things that changed specifically with the terrain expansions in Highlands was how we do our avalanche control. And Hag's talked a little bit about that, and I'm going to have him elaborate very quickly on, we actually, when we do avalanche control, we want to keep the snow in place. And so he talked about boot packing and the boot packing program, and then the ski packing program. These are very important to keeping snow where we want to ski it, and that is on our steeper runs. So Hag, do you want to really quickly cover boot packing and and ski packing?
Okay, like Rich was talking about a couple years ago when we had a good early season snowpack, but then afterwards it kind of changed on us. We started getting up high about October 20th. We started getting storms. Well, what happens if that snow sits there long enough? It turns, as you guys might want to say, sugar snow or rotten snow, faceted snow. It turns to crap. Okay, so the snow just turns to a place where we can't use it anymore. What happened that year in that whole high alpine area, which we call the B zones, we weren't in there quick enough. We threw one charge and washed the whole thing. Well, it barely ever recovered that year. Where we have the areas in the north side, the G zones, we've gotten snow in there. That snow stays a little better, it stays cold. And we were able to actually ski. I think we were open, we had some of the G zones open opening day that year, when the rest of the areas, without having natural snow, barely opened to run. That's the year that Ajax was doing the Bell Chair Down. Of course, we opened 2 weeks later from them at Highlands. So in that period of time, in October to when we can get in there in November, say, we're losing the snow. So unless we can get in there and really work the snow and actually get it to bond with the ground a little and bond with itself, we're going to lose it. So like Rich was saying, we don't want to lose it. You know, our goal is to keep that snow around so we have terrain to ski. This year was a similar program, a similar snow episodes where we had a lot of snow in October and a fair amount in November. So this year we brought teams in, we got up there, we were actually just messing up the snow in areas because we didn't have the full 100-person boot packing crew yet. We were just starting to get those people online. So we got in there, we worked the snow as much as we could. We were able to keep that snow. We still have to protect ourselves. There's a lot of wind loading. There's a lot of terrain features in there that will hurt you if you get caught in a slide, even though it's not much snow. So by protecting those, we actually run cables up the ridge that are buried now, and we put ropes on those, and we can lower ourselves into those terrain to boot pack them, as opposed to throwing dynamite in there and losing everything. So the boot packing process has really gotten us along, and I know I spoke on it earlier, but it's evolved each year that we've been doing it. They said we've had areas where we have a big slab in the middle of a terrain. We'll mark that with chalk that you'd use for when you're a carpenter. And so we'll mark that. We'll come back in later with explosives and charge those areas. So the next day we can get back in there and work it. Because any of these little pieces of terrain that we miss can be detrimental later on to us working it, or somebody can get hurt on something. So we've actually taken a really big approach to making this safe. And that has become something real special for us. And we also have an avalanche, which we don't use hardly anymore. But when we were studying the bowl and learning about it, we put a gun over in Hyde Park, and we were able to shoot most of the ridge line and below it to get that first. Then you can go up with hand charges and then throw hand charges down in. Because the way the slide happened in '84, they started with hand charges off the top into the G8, the first part of G8 to a little bench, nothing was releasing. When they got down to the bench and they threw below them, they had a sympathetic crack that ran all the way up and took everything out above them and wiped them all down into the middle. That crack is what we're trying to break up. It's a shear interface that if you had nothing holding that or stopping that from being held, the minute something hits it, it's going to release. We like to talk about it like a rubber band. So if you stretch a rubber band wide, 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 and all of a sudden you touch it and it just snaps. That's kind of a layman's term about talking about creep and snow load. Well, if you take that and you put a bunch of knots in that rubber band or kind of weave it through something, it's never going to gain that tension enough to crack. So that's what the boot packing is doing. It's breaking up the sheer linear face and not allowing anything to go through there. That's why what we do when we're skiing there is we try and get people to ski different areas to help ski that snow in. So we're not saying, no, we're saving this for us for later. It's, no, you guys help us out. It's a community effort. If you ski this area, that helps us do our job so you can go ski the next area. Therefore, we don't have to kind of go in there and break it up ourselves. It doesn't develop a shear plane inside it. So we have to work all the layers into the snow. So that's really come a long way from where we've started. We still throw lots of bombs for protection for everybody. And we don't have it as bad as the wind loading and Snowmass does. And so you'll hear a lot of wind loading charges going off in there. So.
Alex, thank you. And a lot of those charges are just tests. They're just to see if the boot packing has gone into place. We're out of time?
Not quite.
Okay,
I just
I'm
want
gonna
to.
move fast.
No, you're fine. Could we address the entitlement?
I'm going
And
to turn it
is
over
this
to
where you're
David
going?
Corbin. Yeah, exactly.
All right, perfect. And then we'll do, as soon as we finish up, we'll do like a quick Q&A. We want to give people time to ask some questions too. Is that
That
good
sounds
round up?
perfect.
Perfect.
So the terrain that Hags is referring to is generally high-angle terrain. The Highland Bowl, Steeplechase, Deep Temerity, and the Wall and Snowmass requires exceptional snow safety measures and really keeping the snow in place, which is unique in the industry. Hags is understating it. The Highland Bowl now is studied worldwide because most times when you're doing avalanche control, you are knocking snow down. What we're doing is actually preserving the snow and keeping it there so you can ski. And that terrain that 30 years ago would have been extreme. Now I will take a Powder Pandas class of 5-year-olds into Ozone and they ski it beautifully. Part of that's equipment, but so that has expanded our range of terrain across the 4 mountains. The last thing that we're going to cover tonight is the entitlement process, and that's asking for permission to expand terrain or throw in new lifts or build a building. David Corbin is our expert on this, and David, at a high level, without killing it and not offending Ann Mullins, who's one of our landlords. Go ahead and tell us what you do when you go through a terrain expansion process.
Here we're in an unusual situation. We've got both very active local regulatory agencies, whether we're talking about the city, town of Snowmass Village, Pitkin County, locally, as well as the Forest Service. So we have a combination of private and public lands. In the case of the federal lands, we indeed are a tenant, if you will. We're a permittee. We are responsible to the Forest Service, and we have to follow the rules and regulations of that Forest Service as a federal agency and as our landlord. And when we go through a process, we've got essentially permit boundaries. Those you might consider our leaseholds, if you will, the outside extent of our terrain, and we have operating boundaries within them. And at times, we may want to expand an operating boundary, we may want to expand a permit boundary. An example that's coming is the possibility of expanding terrain to the right, skiers' right of Walsh's on Aspen Mountain. It's a very interesting area back there because it is exactly what I just described. It's a combination of some private land, some public land that's Forest Service land. It's been in an operating boundary, it's been in our permit boundary for quite some time. It has not been in an operating boundary. We haven't been skiing back into it. And it's been sort of split or bifurcated by the private parcels that are in there, not all of which we have owned in our own and sole interest. So for example, in the area around Lucien's Pond, we have been a property owner there for quite some time. We were a tenant in common with another interested party. So we didn't own the full title to the private lands that are part of the area, including public lands, that we'd like to expand into. So in the course of that, we have to resolve first the private property ownership interests, which in the case of that particular parcel we have done. And we will now hopefully be able to go forward with an application both in the federal jurisdiction and in the local jurisdiction, that up there, that would be Pitkin County, to go through and be able to expand our ski terrain up there. The process that we have to go through on the federal side is to identify first whether it's in a master development plan that's approved by the Forest Service. In our case, we've got an old '97 master development plan for Aspen Mountain that actually Victor worked on nearly 2 decades ago. That includes the Pandora's terrain and even the prospect of a lift there. And so it's been in a master plan with respect to the federal agency for quite some time. Obviously not executed. We didn't carry that forward yet. So we've got the underlying master plan that arguably includes that. We might have to update that or refresh that master plan, which any more these days can take from 4 to 6 months before you get Forest Service acceptance of the master plan. That's not construed to be approval, they just accept that document after their preliminary reviews. So you go through that process of master plan, and then you put a project proposal on the federal table that said, we'd like to go ahead and expand into that terrain, including cutting the trails, installing lifts, making other terrain enhancements to it, and grading and whatever may be involved in the cutting and improvement of those trails, roads in and out and so forth. So when you submit that project proposal letter, that in effect initiates your environmental review. And you go through what we call a NEPA process. You may know about National Environmental Policy Act. It's now probably, 45 years old, plus or minus. I went to law school in the mid-'70s and studied it then when it was a new law, without case law yet. So it's been around since that era. You go through that NEPA process and you do a very elaborate environmental review. And there are various stages of that, running from the kind of least impactful, where you get what's called a categorical exclusion, to the most impactful, which you do a full environmental impact statement on. Typically, most of the things that we do involve something that's sort of in the middle ground, called an environmental assessment. And that's essentially where they recognize, the agency recognizes that there's some impacts, if you will, but you can mitigate them. And that those impacts can be essentially tolerated in a way that does not do excessive harm or cause damage to the environment. So for this new terrain, if we were to expand into that, we first file with the feds, go through that process, while subsequently, or after you've made some progress on that, you essentially do a very similar process through the county. County likewise requires master development plans for the mountains. It's sort of redundant. You're working with both a federal jurisdiction and a local jurisdiction, but you go through that master development plan and approval with the county at the same time. In our case, for that terrain, it also involves the other steps that it's rural and remote for the privately held land that's there, and we'd want to turn it into essentially a ski rec zone district. So you go through a federal process of both submitting for and having a master plan for that terrain. You go through the environmental review. You likewise go through the local review of a master plan, and then see if it's in proper zoning, and then likewise go through your special use or grading permits to actually go ahead make those cuts, handle the soils, deal with the construction, and get all of your local permits for that terrain expansion. And it
I did say
takes
quickly,
a
didn't I?
while, yeah. And that, and describing it is far quicker than actually the process. Yes.
How long does all that take, would you say?
For our purposes right now, I'm using a 2 to 3 year window to get all that done.
And then once you acquire the land, how do the runs get designed? Who does that?
That's it.
Victor.
Victor does that.
Is that fun? That sounds fun.
Well, you know, I mean, and it is really fun. I mean, it's the ski trails and so on. I mean, obviously the great people who the Red Rollins, the Andre Roches. I mean, they put all these runs together on Aspen and Buttermilk, and then Sneaky Snobble and his crew did a fantastic job with snowmass. And you have a topographic map, and you know, if you know how to read a topo map and so on, you obviously know that if there's you know, whether it's all trees or whatever, but you obviously know that if there's a bunch of those topo lines that are kind of lined up parallel to one another, pretty evenly spaced all the way down, you got a pretty good long steady run that you could probably put a trail on. If those topo lines kind of bend and shape, you're gonna start to make the ski trails kind of match. Because how many of you guys like to ski side hill slopes? I mean, it's a challenge, but it's better if the ski runs go down the fall line. And so that's why you kind of use that mapping that you have available to you to make that happen. But you know, and I think in the context of you know, like Hag was talking about the history and you know what went on 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago here, 60 years ago, 70 years ago now. But the you know, as we go into this master planning process for snowmass for the future and for Aspen Mountain now, you know, you got to realize that the lifts that were put in the 60s and 70s were put in for the trail system and the ski circulation that was pertinent at the time. And for instance, you know, we talked a little bit about high alpine and snowmass, but the high alpine lift, the original high alpine fixed lift, cost about $300,000 to install. The replacement lift will be $7 million. So when you as a company are going to, you know, if you're going to buy yourself a car that costs as much, you're going to try to make that car do as much as it can, right? You want it to pull trailers, you want it to take kids to the store, you want it to, and get great gas mileage. And so the same thing we do at the ski area. When we're going to make that kind of investment to replace a lift, we're kind of saying, okay, that lift was there because of X, Y, and Z from the 70s. What has changed about how people move around this mountain? What terrain has opened up? What has changed? Is there a better place to put that lift now and to make the best bang for our buck? And so that's essentially the process you go through of thinking outside of the box enough and realizing that the guys who built those lifts and put those trails in 50 years ago did a fantastic job. Our role is to find out if we can better that, taking all the current conditions and profiles and ski densities that we have now. So
Great.
No question.
It seems like that was a good lead into
Perfect
a
segue.
question and answer session. So obviously raise your hands. We'll try to get as many of you as possible. And
Andy.
I'll have an eye back here for some faces back here. Let's start over on this end though and just kind of work our way around. So yeah, back there.
Yes, so this new area, would it come all the way back toward town, or would it feed in? You're talking about east of where we are
It
now, right?
skiers right of Walsh's, and it's about 1,200 to 1,400 vertical feet there. It would be somewhat like Temerity in the sense that you'd have probably fixed grip lift that would go down and sort of dead end. Victor's designed roads in and out, so you again can get in and out of it. But in effect, it's a skier's pod on that same side of the mountain as Walsh's. The terrain would extend down and past the bottom of that trail as you know it today, and extend.
I don't ski there.
Oh,
But I don't
well,
want you down
and it would
the
extend
trail.
off to the, essentially where the Lusheen Pond is. For those of you that are familiar with that area, about 160 acres of terrain in sort of both trail cuts and gladed format.
But it wouldn't come down like to you to have it.
No.
When it
No,
comes down
no,
into
no,
the
no,
top, into the
no.
town, it's gonna be up higher.
Yeah, no, it's high on the flank of the mountain.
And far to the south.
Yeah.
Below Lud's Lane.
It
Yes.
extends down and below Lud's, yeah, to the right again if you're coming down Walsh's.
It's all that terrain that the people get sucked down into because it looks really good. And then they get choked out and
That's where we do all of our rescues.
all the rest.
I've heard before. Travis, you wanna pick another one?
Sure. Well, let's just work our way down the line. Let's start next with you.
Who knows about the origins of the merry-go-round restaurant, of the building itself, and how it came to be where it is?
I'll give my best and maybe Andy can help too, but everyone says it was an old Safeway. Well, it really wasn't an old Safeway. It was I-beams and everything designed like a supermarket would be. And that's when Don Robinson and the crew loaded up the steel and brought it up the mountain and put it into place. Nothing had been done to that whole structure that really was worth talking about for many, many years until we recently went through a remodel a few years ago. I was actually able to assist with a lot of the logistics of getting containers up there while we were still open, unloading everything out of the lower room, tables and chairs and everything. And then the minute that we closed that year, we started plowing the road. I mean, that's the thing that not everyone understands is our construction window is very, very small. And that's a big project we undertook up there. We basically gutted the whole thing, left the roof on with with all the steel infrastructure, the joists, and just everything got taken out of there, all the glass, everything. So we had to get started early. And the day after we closed, we got to get snowcats and tractors on the road to be able to get our construction crews up there. We started sending them up the lift until the road was kind of melted out and taken care of. So it was quite a project. And if you've gotten to see it now, it's a lot nicer than it was.
The Safeway story was so good.
There's no question. And you can thank David Corbin. He managed that whole project and I think did an outstanding job so that he kept the old character, but we've upgraded it dramatically. Okay, we're still going this direction. I saw one here.
Well, I just had a question concerning the affordability of skiing, and that's not exactly what you're talking about, but it's all part of it. Because there's a huge investment, more than I ever realized after hearing these gentlemen talk, in ski areas, in a ski area like this one. A huge investment. And it's very important for the ski company and anybody else to keep this place affordable for a large number of people to use it. Because it's a massive area between all four mountains. And you have to keep the number of people here. And as skiing becomes more and more expensive for the individuals and families and so forth, and I love to ski, I got my whole family skiing and grandchildren skiing, but I really wonder how much longer they're gonna be able to afford it with the families, for any length of time.
And we look at it constantly.
I'm sure you do.
And the answer, I hope we see a little bit of a leveling off. But more importantly, what we do is we segregate, and if you buy advance or multiple days, it goes dramatically down from the window lift ticket price. And then locals passes, we try to keep them as definitely as affordable as possible. If you can, if you have enough time to do a pass, that's certainly your best value. But I agree, and I didn't want to bore you with health costs increase for our insurance, and it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
Property taxes, things that go up double digits every year. But it is definitely on our radar, and I hope that we, if nothing else, as an industry, see a leveling off.
Great. Let's jump this way, and I'll come right back to you.
What
Sorry.
are the plans for expanding and replacing the high alpine lift?
She wants to know what the plans are for expanding and replacing high alpine.
David Corbin, you want to run that one?
We're in the process right now of environmental reviews. Victor has written the project application some time ago. We've got master plan approval or acceptance that would include that. And we're in the process of having the environmental review right now. We expect environmental decision sometime this spring or early summer. which would give us the permission through a decision notice to go ahead and do that lift. It's a question of whether we could do it and get permission in time to do it this summer or next summer or the summer following, depending upon the approval timing and our capital availability. So you will see it coming, probably to a theater near you within a year or so.
It'll be the next new lift.
Let's jump here.
Andy?
Just to add a comment on 1976, 77. Actually, Highlands opened that winter, Christmas, and we trucked people down from Quarterway during the Christmas season. We didn't have very many people because Ajax and Buttermilk and Snowmass were closed. And in fact, we were able to open because Whip Jones had the first snowmaking gun in town. And we had the little part right out in front of where the Ritz is today. We taught beginners in 76, 77. And when Ajax opened in late January, it started snowing. It snowed a bit in February, it snowed even more in March. But unfortunately, to all 4 mountains, nobody came.
Andy, we've always heard the rumors that Whip had the first snow gun in the valley, and thank you for putting it on the record. So,
I had. You had a question? Or you,
Yeah,
right?
I had a question.
Yeah.
The history's been great, and we know a lot about today. What about 20 years from now? What are you dreaming about? What's on the horizon for our future?
Really what we would be looking at is small terrain expansions a la Pandora's, Loge Bowl at Highlands. We're running out of terrain within our permit boundaries, so there's not too much there. And upgrading lifts. You'll see some small buildings upgraded. At some point we hope to have 1A as a vibrant portal to the thing. But beyond that, we don't have too much on the books locally as far as big expansions or new terrain. The question always comes up, interconnect, that was the original founder's vision, and that's certainly on the horizon, but I don't anticipate, and there's nothing in the short term that we have to play.
Sorry, I didn't down this hallway. Are there any questions back here? Do I have any more back here? Did you have a question?
Well, I was gonna comment what the gentleman here did in 77.
Roger?
Highlands did have the first snowmaking.
Okay, Roger Segan's Andy's twin, so there.
I was coaching then, and we used that little venue at the bottom of the mountain for training. And we had the fittest ski team in the Rocky Mountains because we had to hike up and down and set gates in what was rock hard snow. It was really the first ice the kids ever had to train on unless they went back east.
Okay, well, I mean, that's great that we have some people that actually lived through that, because that's been a rumor that I've always heard, and now I can verify it.
The question back here?
Yeah, maybe this isn't the format, but the dynamics of boards and skis living together, does that fall under your auspices?
Yeah, that's Hags' problem. No.
We were the first ones to keep them.
Yeah, we did.
And Highlands was the first ones to allow snowboarding too in the valley.
We both my wife and I get really hard by boards.
Really?
And I'm not criticizing, I mean, we all want to ski together, but.
Yeah, when we permitted it on Aspen Mountain, I was on that committee, and I am both a snowboarder and a skier. I've never been involved in a collision on either. We do see it. We hope that it's an age-based thing versus a equipment-based, because we have a lot of people that successfully snowboard every day. So,
I've never hit.
But safety on the slopes is definitely paramount, and we do everything we can to ensure that there are no collisions. And I'm very sorry that you've been involved in 3, and it sounds like it's 3 with snowboarders.
Yeah, from behind.
From behind. And then please do report them, and we have some technology now that allows us to really track people down. If you give us a good description, we have the pass system is 4-color, and we have videotape at the base, so we'll do what we can to prevent that is really the ideal goal. And then certainly enforcement in our slow zones. Yes?
Hats off to whoever's responsible for the superb surface conditions in these lean times.
Yeah.
I will convey that. In November, snowmakers are the most important team. At this time of year, the cat crews, and that's absolutely the grooming crews. And then lift maintenance is the most important all the time. So those are my 3 big departments. Patrol, I can take or leave. But yes, I'm gonna send them a big public, and we're probably gonna do a special Cat Skinner's dinner for them as well this year.
That's perfect.
So another,
Couple more
John.
questions here? Yeah?
Yeah, we might not have had the first snow gun, but in '77, Darcy sent Tom Marshall and somebody else on a road trip to Maine where we purchased 2 snow guns that we brought back on a trailer. They were hooked up to the fire hydrant system at Snowmass Village, and they were driven, the fans were driven with a gasoline engine. If you want to try to keep that going at night with water all over it, it was not very effective, but we did have them.
I can only imagine. Okay, so 77 on Snowmass?
77 Snowmass.
Okay, that's good to know. Yes?
A couple more right here, and then we'll have to wrap up.
I have 2 quick questions tied into loges at Aspen Highlands. My first trip out here was either in 1980 or 81. I could barely ski. I came with a ski club, and I was talked into going up to loges. I remember 2 things, and maybe my memory is not clear. It seemed to me we had to take 4 chairs to get to the top of loges.
That's correct.
Okay, and then the second part, when I got off, is I could barely ski. It seemed like that run, which is now called Broadway, I don't know what it was called then, seemed like it was
More narrow.
much more
Yes.
narrow. So was it actually widened?
It
Or
was.
was that just my?
I thought you were gonna say when you got off the lift, you went and hit the little building which was down there. That was the outhouse we called Gag City. That eventually blew away. And I don't think it's ever been found. But yeah, as you make that left turn there, it was a very narrow trail. And right now, we're actually deal with the springtime thaw of that rock face is actually peeling off little by little, just chunks of it. So in the summertime, we have to go in there with a bulldozer and kind of peel up all that stuff that's fallen off because they had to cut that rock, and now it's just a face that goes through different things.
Right here in front.
This continual expansion, is this planned in order to increase and attract more clientele? Or is it, if you're going to have a return on investment, otherwise you're going to have to increase prices?
David?
Yes. No, it's not a wrong question. One, as Rich had commented, there's actually very little terrain expansion that we've got. We've got very little that we could really expand into. The question of connecting the mountains in the future is maybe a different subject as to whether or not you would take the terrain that you've got and actually link it. But for us, it is very hard. Say I take Pandora's as an example, 160 acres of terrain, not a lot of terrain. And most of that advanced or expert skier, some intermediate, so you can serve a range but not all of your skiing public. And it would be very difficult to try to figure out in that particular case if we spent, say, somewhere between $5 and $6 million on the total expansion, if we were to include trails, lifts, planning, entitlements, permits, etc. It would be very difficult to say we could calculate a return on investment for that 160 acres. You know, there's no question it would be hard to determine if there's a return on that. What that means to us, though, is it involves some new terrain, some new activity, a new facet to the skiing experience at Aspen Mountain. So we'd look at that investment as part of the totality of Aspen Mountain's financial performance. And we would hope we'd get more skier days out of it, no question. It may not draw very many additional bodies to town. It may not really increase the total number of skiers that we enjoy here, but we would hope to get more skier use out of what's now presently unutilized portion of our terrain, or what might be used in terms of sort of bandit skiing, out of bounds skiing, cross the rope skiing. We'd legitimize the terrain and broaden the experience for all of our guests. Would it return individually as an investment? It'd be hard to say so.
Well, what has been your experience on any previous expansions?
Ugh.
Impossible.
Yeah.
We've done them and we don't know.
Yeah.
The way I always joke, in this room, the terrain expansion would be for passionate skiers to expand your experience. If it's in our ownership room, I always say, yes, there's a definite ROI on this project.
Did you cut the tape before you
We have editing privileges. All right, we really have to do two last questions. We'll do you, and then Jane Click is going to round us out, and then that'll be it. So you real fast.
Hi, Jane. You'll find this amusing. Those of us who are baby boomers are about to reach the new plateau that you've set for the senior tickets. What do you think's going to happen with that when we all get to be like a year and a half from now, 70? You going to up it to 75, 72?
There's no plans to change that. And so no.
Reached it once, but
Yeah, I know. 70 used to be free. It used to be free industry-wide. I think Telluride's the only place that's still, it's 80 in Telluride, and if you're 80, you can ski free there.
And it's a problem, I would think. I mean, seeing as so much of the population is like.
When I started, 70 plus was 2% of our business. It's now over 12. So just to give you an idea of the demographic. But there's no plans to change the age on the Silver Pass, and it'll still be your best value if you can ski every day. Less than $3 a day. Okay, Jane.
Okay, so originally skiing started up on Mount Hayden, and you're talking about expansion. Has anybody ever given any thought to maybe going up there?
Not internally in the company because we want to keep our lights, but you know who has the plans for that is John Wilcox. Has drawn full lift engineered plans for a ski area that was the original ski area with the Barbarian Lodge, and I've seen them. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's Ted Ryan.
Yep, but
and Billy Fitz.
Aspen Skiing Company has no plans to go on to Hayden or anywhere outside of our permit boundary.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you guys very much.